Welcome to MyLife, Chassidus Applied, episode 25. We have a very rich episode ahead of us, and I hope you find it as enlightening as I did when I did the research and looking up the sources. Please keep those questions coming. You can submit them anonymously to meaningfullife.com/MyLifeLive. They're anonymous and completely confidential. If you want to write to me personally, because I cannot respond there because I do not know where those questions are coming from, please write to Simon, S-I-M-O-N, at meaningfullife.com. So in this episode, we will be covering several different topics, including one that I began last episode 24 about secular education. Let us begin with that, because that will be a multi-part discussion, which I'm sure will continue in the weeks ahead as well. So after establishing and answering the many, many questions, maybe more than any other question, the issue of secular education, of what is the role of, is there a role, and what is the role of secular education in a Chassidic home, a Chassidic education? Is there a place for it, is it not? We discussed at length the Rebbe's siches, especially in the early years, and then later as well, but especially in Tezvav and Tezayin and Tavshin Chav, Simchus Torah, Achar Shel Pesach, and I will definitely list which siches in the coming episodes, discussing that the bottom line that the Rebbe was battling was the issue of tachlis, that it became a type of worship, of feeling that the only way to survive, to succeed, the measure of success in this world is through a college education, the only way to make a livelihood. And that was the Rebbe's main battle. What I want to address today in this episode is a little more the effect and the meaning of secular education. What is this chachmas chitzenius, chachmas u'masa'elam, the different words that are different names given for it. I also addressed then that story with the circle and the center, that in order to understand knowledge in general is a tool. And the most important thing for a person is to know their mission in this world. If you get distracted from your mission because you have gone off to some type of side show and made the means an end, that was the main problem, the ikar issue the Rebbe dealt with. So we have to understand, as I discussed then, what exactly is the role of education, secular education. At the end of the day, the fact is that God created this world, and there is a logic and a knowledge to understand the world, whether it's medicine or other sciences, the physical, the liberal, the social sciences. Many of them are objective the study of the universe. So let us begin with learning Tanya inside. We're going to learn chapter 8 in Tanya, where the Alter Rebbe talks about this. It's just a few lines, but it's filled with meaning. So let's just learn it inside, and I'll translate together with the Rebbe's commentary on this Tanya. On the end of chapter 8, in general chapter 8, the Alter Rebbe is discussing that when a person gets involved, immersed in things of this world, what impact it has on his neshama. So we know there's klipas nega, there's sholosh klipas atmeis. So in chapter 8, he discusses the issue of different immersions. So he begins to talk about different people speaking about things like dvarim betelim, dvarim isurim, litzonis, lashon hara, kayetze bezem, shem sholosh klipas atmeis legamri. That when a person speaks about really in things that are prohibited, we're not talking about not neutral matters. Divrei reshus, litzonis, making fun, sarcasm, lashon hara, speaking evil about others. That's sholosh klipas atmeis. Then he goes on and says, what about someone who's efshalei lasik b'teira ve'esik b'dvarim betelim? He's able to learn studying Torah. Instead, he uses it not something prohibited. Dvarim betelim means simply not learning Torah. So he talks about all the so-called cleansing and the cause and effect that this has. But then he concludes, v'chena esik b'chochmas u'masa'elam b'chlal dvarim betelim yachshav. Even oven bittul Torah. When a person studies Chochmas U'Masa'elam, what does Chochmas U'Masa'elam means? It means the wisdom of the nations of the world. It means accumulated wisdom that human beings came up on their own, even if it's correct, even if it's important, and even if it's truth. We're not talking about just an opinion. So this is considered like oven bittul Torah. Kameshakosah b'hilchos Talmud Torah. The Alter Rebbe refers to Hilchos Talmud Torah. So we're not discussing necessarily that it's necessarily a davar asur, it's prohibited. It's just compared to learning Torah. Why are you studying that when you should be studying Torah, which is the primary reason you came to this world, which is to serve God, to understand God, and understand what God wants of us. So even though it has chachma, it's called chachma sumas elam, it's wisdom. It's not just sitting and talking folly, meaningless things, but it's not Torah, so it's considered bittul Torah compared to that. Like he says, that v'debarta bom shalei Torah v'imam dvarim acherim, as he brings in Hilchos Talmud Torah. V'debarta bom, you should speak bom in divrei Torah, and not in things that have no connection to that. Then he continues. Then the Alter Rebbe continues. After saying what he just said, in addition, not only is it dvarim b'teilim in the sense that you could have studied Torah, and instead you did something that's not divrei Torah, there's a tumah yisera, an impurity, a spiritual impurity that actually defiles you, that comes from chachmas atumas dvarim b'teilim. That's more than the defilement that comes from just talking about things that have no meaning. She'ena malbish u'metame rak hamidus miyised haruach hakodesh shebenafshei elikis. Because when a person just speaks matters of folly, or just plays a game. Last week I read a question. Someone said, "What is it better to play? Better to play games? We're not talking about violent games. We're not talking about prohibited games. Better to just play a game than study some secular wisdom?" The answer is, in one sense, yes. Why? Because just plain neutral dvarim b'teilim. When I say neutral, I mean nothing prohibited, but nothing of content. That's just metama the midas of a person. Betumas klipas nega shebedvarim b'teilim haboyim yisei daruach harasha beklipas zu nefesh habamis kidliel. But it does not metama leibchinas Chabad shabenafshe, because it doesn't require intellect. It doesn't require applying your mind to it. Ma'achas shem divrei shtus u'burus, because those things dvarim b'teilim are just divrei shtus u'burus, which means emptiness. Things filled with vanity. Buddhist is also things that are just Elam Haza Shagam Shetim V'Ameorot Shechem Ledaber. Cain. It doesn't require any particular intelligence or wisdom. It's something anybody can talk about. Plain gossip or plain talk about that. We're not talking about Lashon Hara. So anyone can talk. So it's metama. It does defile a person because everything you do affects your spirit. But it doesn't defile it defiles only the midas, not the mech. By contrast, when a person uses his mind and studies the wisdom of the world, of the nations, this is in contrast to the wisdom of Torah. He actually encloses and defiles also Chabad shebenafshe, helikis, of his divine soul. The tumas klipas nega shebechachmas elu. With the defilement, with the impurity of the klipas nega of Shavchachim Sel. The emphasis here is klipas nega, which means we're not talking about studying a wisdom, let's say Avodah Zarah. To study Avodah Zarah, and we'll soon discuss Sanhedrin and so on, is prohibited. That goes in the prohibition, that goes in Shalosh Klipas Atmei's category. Or to study other things that are Divrei Znus, for example. Or other matters that are not appropriate. That's what we're not talking about. We're talking about neutral scientific wisdom, let's say. Neutral chachmas umas. That's klipas nega, but it's still metama because you could have used your mind to sanctify it with spiritual and divine thoughts and ideas, and instead you're defiling now the mind. It's not just plain talk that like he said, that anybody can do. Here you need your mind. Shenoflu shama. Because this wisdom, the wisdom of the world, the wisdom of the nations, is wisdom that comes from acharayim. Real wisdom is the divine wisdom. a reflection of that, you can say. The outer dimension of Chochmah, the Kedusha is Chochmah, the Acharayim is Chochmah Chitzenius. We'll soon discuss why. And then he's going to make the key exemption and exception which I want to address. Because that, of course, is the key twist to saying why is it possible to study and why some did study, etc. But let me explain a moment what the case is here. What's the difference between two wisdom? If someone sits and studies mathematics or physics or medicine or law or whatever it is, why is that some type of chokhmah, wisdom, that is more defiling than lahavdil, chokhmah of Torah? The answer is very simple. It goes back to what I discussed in the last episode. The reason we were sent to this earth is not just to be wise people and to study about the world, understand it, and even make money as a result. That's not why we're sent. We're sent to the world to transform the world and make it adira b'tachteina. So what wisdom do we need primarily? The wisdom how to do that. The wisdom to fulfill the purpose. When you say something is pnimi, something chitzeni is, for example, when you want to build a building, your interest is the home that you want to build for yourself and your family. However, as a means to get there in this world, the only way to do that is to hire architects and contractors and people who are experts who know the wisdom of engineering and of construction and of design, etc., and architecture. It's a means to an end. But if you suddenly make the means the end and say, you know what, the most important thing is to be the architect, and you forget the purpose for what you're building the home, that's called chochmah chitzenius. Why chitzenius? Because you're focusing not on the ikah, not on the purpose of it. You're talking on the outside of it. Acharayim of chochmah d'kedusha. So is there such a wisdom in the world? Absolutely. It evolves from the wisdom of the divine wisdom that God used to create the universe, which evolves in turn from where? From the divine plan. So everything begins with Torah. That's why we say Estakel Baraisa Bar Alma, that God looked at the Torah and created the world. The Torah is the blueprint for what? Even for science and for math. So for a person to focus on the means when they should be focusing, and they could be focusing on the end, that is called defiling the mind, when the mind could have been used. In addition to the reason that he gave earlier, that is Dvarim B'Teilim compared to the study of Torah. So it would be like saying you've gotten hijacked, your mind has been hijacked by a sideshow. Is it have value? Of course it has value. It's part of the wisdom of the world. Remember, as I said then, the wisdom of the world is also understanding God's mind, but it's God's mind as he applies himself to creating the world. Now he continues. Elim Cain, here's the exception. Two exceptions, yes. If he takes this wisdom, the math or the science or the chokhmah umas as he calls it, this outer wisdom that I described, and makes from it kardem, an axe, a tool with which to cut down a tree, so to speak, with which to use it for a purpose that is something that is part of the purpose of your life, then it's permitted. For example, he says, Dahainu, Kedei Lisparnis Mehen Berevach Laved Hashem. In order to sustain himself, Berevach, the Alter Rebbe adds, we'll emphasize that in a moment. Berevach means not just the minimum, Berevach means with a profit that you make more than necessary to serve God. That's one exception. Because then you've reconnected this outer wisdom with the inner wisdom. Because you're studying it not just to know or to make money or to have a job. You're studying it in order to help elevate the world, to sustain yourself and your family, and in order to serve God. The Rebbe has a ha'ara here in the word Revach that tells us a big chiddush. It means that even if you could make a livelihood, a minimum livelihood, without studying any secular education, still, you want to live a little more comfortably, and you want to live in a way that's more than you just need. One could argue, you know what? If you can make a livelihood without studying this and just studying Torah, why are you going to study? But even if you want to make profit and become wealthy, but if it's Lavid Hashem, that's the purpose, it's also acceptable. Because there's no problem with making parnas. There's no problem with becoming wealthy either. And Torah wealth is a bracha. a blessing. The goal here is not poverty. The question is, what is this wisdom being used for? Is it an end in itself, or is it for a purpose, l'shem shamayim? Oi, a second way, sheyadeya lishtamish behen lavedas Hashem or the teirase. Or if you know how to use this wisdom, chokhmas umis, to serve God or Torah, then that's also permitted. So the first is for parnasa, revach even, lavid Hashem, to serve God. Here is to know how to use the wisdom, not just to make to do a trade, any job or profession that helps you make money, and then you could serve God better, whether it's through tzedakah or through actually being a person that has more means, so you can spend time serving God more, or the actual chokhmas, the wisdom itself, you know how to use for Avodas Hashem or for Torah, which means different ways that it elevates you to Torah, and I'll discuss that in a moment. Then the Alter Rebbe concludes, Perek Ches, V'zeh Taimah Shel HaRambam v'Ramban Zal v'Siyaiton she'osku behen. This is the reason of the Rambam, Maimonides, and Ramban, Nachmanides, and others like them, Siyaiton. And similar, that osku behen, that were involved in these chokhmas u'umis, because they weren't just studying it for shleimus to be knowledgeable, they were studying it because they knew how to use it for Torah, for Avodas Hashem or Torah. The Rebbe has a letter, a very interesting letter in Tovshin Tes, that is printed in the Hisofis of the Likutei Sichos Chelik Beis and also in Igros Kedush. I believe volume 2, if I'm correct. Let me just check. Yes, volume 2. And there, volume 3, page 124. The letters from Yud Tes Siv and Tovshin Tes. And then there's a follow-up letter that the Rebbe wrote to someone who asked him continuing questions on this topic. From Yud Gimel Menachem of Tovshin Tes, printed in the same volume 3 on page 169. So page 124 and 169 in volume 3 of Igros Kedush. The Rebbe there spells out and explains this Tanya. It spells out actually 6 levels, which I'm not going to go through in detail now. I'll just read them quickly. 6 ways that you can use chokhmas u'umis le'Avodas Hashem le'teirase. And maybe you can include also the first thing, parnasa barchova. The first way is that you know this wisdom not from the wisdom, but you know it from Torah, because Torah is like the map. Like I said before, you look in the Torah, and that's how you know it. Then there's ways where the Torah actually says a mitzvah that you should learn. For example, Hilchos Kiddush HaChedush. So Bezdin has to calculate astronomical calculations. So it's a mitzvah to learn this wisdom. Number 3, that when you're in a situation where you cannot think of Divrei Torah, for whatever reason, because you're in a place that you're not supposed to think Torah, and so you use your mind to think about some wisdom of the world. So it's also a mitzvah, but in a negative way. Not to do it, but you can't do Torah, so you do that. Number 4, that you want to learn Torah or perform a mitzvah, but you can't do it without some knowledge. And this gives the example of Rav that went 18 months to study with a shepherd. So he should learn the different things, the different mumim, the different blemishes and wounds that an animal has for halacha. So it's not Torah, not mitzvah. As before, it's a mitzvah to be mechadish chedesh. It's just that he couldn't figure it out, so it's like a hechsher mitzvah, a hechsher l'Torah mitzvahs. Number 5, k'dei limtza parnasase, like we said, the first point, in order to sustain yourself, or that the work you do from this, you use it as a hechsher achana l'davar heter. And then number 6, is what says in Tanya here, that you're allowed to learn these chokhmas because you know how to use them lechatchila, Not for the other reasons that we described before. You know how to use them initially for the Alter Rebbe's Lashon, Avedus Hashem Terase. You can look it up and learn it more in detail. I think let's suffice with that. I just want to add one more thing that I think is important. And we'll of course discuss this further, how do we apply this to our lives. The bottom line is, from all of this we know, is that before we talk about sex education and how to answer questions going to college, parnasa, can you make a livelihood, can you not, etc., we have to understand what we're talking about. That's why I began with the tachlis. What's the most important thing is the mission. Now we've learned and understand what is the nature of Chochmas Umis and why Taka the Torah has an issue with it. Because what it does is it distracts you and can make from the means an end. In addition to what I said earlier about the defilement, etc. One more thing that's very important to point out. There was a line they say that today many people think there's a higher rate of literacy. So some wise man once said, that's not really the case. The only difference today and the past was today illiterate people know how to read. God forbid that all this discussion is not an advocating illiteracy. Jews never advocated illiteracy. We're literate people. The question is what literacy means. Does literacy meaning knowing a lot? Like that same fellow who said that people read more and more about less and less. So you can read a lot and know a lot. Is literacy knowing a lot, or literacy is knowing what to use it for? And that's the key focus that I wanted to make. And hopefully in the next episode we'll address more details and answering specific questions about the parnasa and other matters that I read, and I will read more as we go along. Okay. One more thing to follow up from last week is a correction I'd like to make. I misspoke, and many of you pointed it out, and I want to acknowledge it right here. When I was speaking about Chabad light, quote unquote, which of course I totally reject the concept because Chabad is defined by the Alter Rebbe and by the Rabbeim. So I was discussing how each of us have to live up to a high standard. But to start designating people and calling them different names is not what the Alter Rebbe intended with establishing Chabad. Chabad is for everybody, and there's a high standard, and each person has to try to find out where do you stand and try to grow in that direction. Our goal is not to call people by names and not try to denigrate them, or in some way a person calling themselves a name and therefore don't expect much from me because I am the light version of it. So I mentioned there that the Alter Rebbe's Vart, what they say in Tanya. So this is actually from Hayom Yom. And as I said, I acknowledged the error. I should have looked inside. I spoke quickly, but I want to explain where I was addressing. So I mentioned that the Alter Rebbe, had he written Emes La'amite, he would have had much less Chassidim. So he wrote Emes. The truth is, this is what it says in Hayom Yom. That at the end of Ageres HaKedesh, Kotenti, the second Siman, Epistle 2, that the Alter Rebbe wrote after he came out of prison in Yutas Kislev, it says that he wrote the Midas Emes Liyankiv. Had the Alter Rebbe not written Midas Emes Liyankiv, well, the gehat noch 50,000 Chassidim. He would have had 50,000 more Chassidim. But the Rebbe meant Midas Emes, which is actually the opposite of what I was saying. So he wrote the word Emes, hiring the standard, and had he not, he would have 50,000 more Chassidim. But let's address that for a moment. The fact of the matter is, Chabad, we know, is meant to be for everybody. The Alter Rebbe said it's not a maflega. If it's not meant to include so many people, so why do we say Chabad, Yifutzim and Chutz is for everybody? Chassidus Chabad is for everybody. Something change? The answer is simple. The Alter Rebbe's standard, he would not compromise. The standard of Chabad is the standard of Emes. It mont midas Emes. At the same time, Chassidus is meant to reach every human being with this high standard. So the pshat, I would say, is not that he would have 50,000 more and he created an elitist system and therefore 50,000 fell out. No, he lifted up that even those 50,000, if you want to join, so to speak, this is the standard. But we're not excluding you. So my misspoken was how to explain it, but you have to at the end of the day say that Chassidus Chabad is for everybody. The answer, of course, is because everyone's shaykh to Emes. Every Jew is shaykh to Emes. The Rebbe quotes very often the Hilchos Gerushin and Seif Perek Beis, the Rambam, that every Jew be'emes wants to fulfill Torah mitzvahs. So you have to say that that it wasn't about taking Chassidus and bringing it down a level, not writing the word emes, and then saying, you know what, even if you're not so emes, you can join. That's not the vart. It requires emes, but it's for everybody, and we can lift you up to that level. But the Alter Rebbe established that standard. So, moving right along to the next question. The legitimacy of mushrooms. So let me read the question. What is your opinion about Lubavitchers that have been coined by some people with a name, the denigrated name mushrooms? It seems like a term that is very commonly used among us, yet it sounds terrible. I actually believe that anti-Semites have used this term on Jews in the past. Question number 2, in the same vein. I live in a large city that could easily use 10 more shluchim. The one official shliach doesn't seem to want anyone else here at this time. Do we leave this to the bureaucrats? In the meantime, the rates of intermarriage, conversion, assimilation are getting worse, chas v'sholom. Since this is pekuach nefesh, life and death, spiritually, I'm wondering if there's any way you could personally jumpstart something, maybe through this forum, getting a committee to work on the issue to fix the problem, if the higher-ups are not. And what are the many young Geleit who truly want to go on shlichus to do if no doors are officially open to them? And they are worried about fundraising. P.S. On a somewhat humorous note, maybe it's worth telling them in public that it's probably more palatable to be a fried mushroom than a harsh horseradish. Okay. I read this exactly as it was written to me, uncensored. A few other questions came in this same category. I think it's appropriate to speak about. Being that this is Chassidus Applied, I'm not speaking here my own opinions, hopefully, but addressing this, the question was asked to the Rebbe, how the Rebbe would respond. It's hard for me to imagine that the Rebbe will call any Jew a mushroom. Definitely someone whose intention is perhaps a good intention to spread Yiddishkeit. Maybe they're not going about it the perfect right way, but to call someone a mushroom I don't think is a Jewish way to do things, definitely not a Chassidish way. So let me address this as bluntly as I can. There's no question that the Rebbe wants Seder. Seder means an order. You can't have hefkedus. Shluchim go out to different parts of the world. Someone comes there first, as the Rebbe once wrote in a letter, Nishlach l'Rishena, so he's there first, so he's doing his work. Someone else comes, has a job that's not the same job, obviously. Different area, different type of work. They make their conditions between each other. But the Rebbe at the same time was not a bureaucrat, nor did he create a corporation. The Rebbe is a Torah movement. Chassidus is a Torah movement. Not Torah with a Seder. Someone pointed out to me, someone sent me today a note that the Rebbe wrote, Kimefursim, Hatfosas Atana Shayach Lekahos, Shiluch Shluchim Sheyichya Lemlach, Lemerkus Linyan Echinuch. In Ksav Yad of the Rebbe. I just want to say, even though I'm reading it, but as someone who's seen, unfortunately, the use of the Rebbe's notes used, unfortunately, by anyone with their own agenda, it's always good to see the whole context. What is this an answer to? It looked to me cut off what was written on top of it. So I read it with qualification, but I read it nonetheless. The Rebbe wanted to say that, but he did not create corporations and did not create a bureaucracy. The Rebbe said that all the organizations should clean up their corporate thing. Yes, of course, every organization has to have a board, and every organization should have a good fiscal responsibility, and they're raising money, and they have to be legal, etc. But the Rebbe Chassidus is a Torah movement, a Torah Bavegung. It's not a maflega. At the same time with a Seder. So we have to ask ourselves a very practical question. It is true, there are shluchim in many different cities. But at the same time, there are 14 million Jews. I made a calculation. I spoke about this at the regional kinnus of New England, which was from New York all the way to Maine. A few hundred shluchim were there. There are 14 million Jews came Yirbu on earth. Let us say there's 4,000 shluchim, official shluchim from Malach, let's say, if that's the right number. It comes out to 3,500 Jews for each shliach. So look into our own hearts and say, are you going to reach every shliach 3,500 Jews? Need I say more? There's 7 billion people on this planet. So I did the math here too. 7 billion divided by 4,000 is 1.75 million per shliach. Now, if we presented this to the Rebbe, clearly the Rebbe would not be satisfied and say, hey, it's been divided, the territory, to 4,000, and the army is closed. At the same time, every shliach who went out, every shluch who went out the day they left on shlichus, or the day they were inspired to go, were once a young man and woman. Now a little older, more experienced. There are thousands and thousands that are still coming. The grass is growing. Every generation continues to grow. You go into 770, you go into Kfar Chabad, you go into the major cities all over the United States and the world. There's communities, South America, hundreds, if not thousands and thousands. How many marriages are there a week in Chabad? 20, 30, 40. I mean, all over the world in the marriage season. So what are we saying? The army is closed. 14 million are not being reached. Why? Because we can't figure out a way. So I am saying here very straightforward. What the Rebbe wants, and you could look in the Sikha Vayeshev Tavshim Mem Aleph, he bavorned it there already, how you continue to grow in each shliach. If we had a little Chassidish bittul, and we didn't worry about it so much in a corporate, bureaucratic way, and there weren't so many insecurities and financial worries that someone's going to steal someone's gvidim, we'd have a whole different picture. So I am not a leader, and I'm not suggesting I am not here to fill the void of leadership, but I am quoting what I believe is the Rebbe's sichos and the Rebbe's intentions. And if someone wants to challenge it and say the army is closed because it's been divided, feel free to do so. But explain yourself if you do so. There's no question in my mind that the word mushroom is a derogatory term that shouldn't be used. There's no question in my mind that we have to put our heads together. Absolutely not done in a hefkedik way. Everybody just does whatever they like. But you know what's going to happen if we don't do this? People will do whatever they like because they are passionate people who may be young and very driven and are ready to do anything without necessarily asking anybody. So it's incumbent upon us, especially and behooves us if we're responsible people and we want to fulfill the Rebbe's kavanah, is to learn to embrace everybody who wants to be in this army. And there's definitely a way to do it if we apply ourselves. I will absolutely categorically reject the idea that the model that some people think is the model to work. Maybe it's not. And the way we have to look at it is, what is the Even HaBeich in the test? So it definitely should be done in an orderly way, it should be in an organized way, it should be done with malach, and it should be done with all the entities involved, but this is not Starbucks, it's not McDonald's, and so on. This is Chassidus, this is your chutza. And remember that Rebbe's Ratzon will be fulfilled whether we like it or not. And remember there are young men and women who are passionately driven, and it's our job is to figure out how to embrace and how to turn this into a movement that will be nachas to the Rebbe, and yet conquer the 14 million Jews and the 7 billion people on this planet. How? That we need to get our minds together, but if we all thinking what the kavanah is, and we don't think about negei b'dover, let's be honest, you have to recuse yourself. If you're going to say an opinion, and you have something to gain financially, because you're there already, and another person is not, or because you think you have financial concerns and interests, that's called halacha negei b'dover. So you have to find someone who's objective. On the other hand, if someone so-called is an upstart and just comes into an area and says, I want to settle here, they're also negei b'dover. So we have to look at what the Rebbe's kavanah and find a method to be embracing. And I have no doubt if we apply ourselves, everyone will be happier. There'll be shalom, and there'll be harchava, and there'll be growth. And as the Rebbe says in Vayeshev Mem Aleph, which everybody can read, the Sikha Vayeshev Mem Aleph talks about melech malcham lochim. He talks about people who undermine their own mazes because they're afraid someone else is going to take away something from them. All this is addressed there. It's not my words. Read it on your own. Those are my few Hartzika words about this issue. And we have to stop using derogatory terms on people. I know it's a very good, cool thing for branding, and it's a good way to dismiss and to go to war against anyone that's so-called. I don't even want to repeat the name. But I don't know if it's the Chassidish way, if it's the Rebbe's way. Maybe there's other methods that have to be used to embrace. And yes, there has to be rules, there have to be guidelines. But as the Rebbe says many times, Eitzah Teva, advice, at the end of the day, we all know that guidelines are only as good as enforcing them. And enforcing them is not so easy in a world where you have passionate people and you have a need. So the best way to do it is with a Seidic way, a Masudic way, as the Rebbe wanted it to be done. Let's go to another question. The question of secular music. What does the Rebbe Chassidus have to say about music? How selective must one be about listening to which music? Only Chabad music, Chassidish music, Chazonis, how about Kalbach music, mainstream, more free music, more modern music, etc. And of course, you could throw into the lot secular music. Talked about secular wisdom. Question 2, in the same vein. I started listening to the radio when I was 14 years old and continued listening till when I was 17. And after I stopped for a year, I felt how it was really affecting me. But now I'm 20 and I started composing music, and sometimes it's very hard not to listen because, yes, they're very attracting and jumpy. But I know that it is affecting my neshama, but I'm always asked, what's the problem? Is the music klipas nega if it leads you closer to Hashem? Or the problem is that you're connecting to their neshama, meaning the composers and the singers' neshama. In the same context, what's the clear problem for movies? I'm not going to address movies now. I'm going to address music. The clearer I get it, the better it's going to be for me and all my friends. Thank you so much, and I love your shiurim. You're surely bringing Mashiach. Thank you very much. I hope so. Third question. I'm a Baal Tshuva and I grew up listening to secular music. It's part of who I am. There were points in my journey that I became really extremely actually deleted. I became really extreme and actually deleted my collection of music. The longer I am from, the more integrated I feel and comfortable with who I am as a religious Jew and as a Jew who lived in the world for many years unobservant. I can't deny that there is a special place in my heart for the music I grew up with. When I'm shopping in a store and it plays in the background, it puts me in a great mood. It's who I am. Am I meant to make myself feel so guilty about my life, my liking of secular music? Am I overreacting? Is Goyish music acceptable for Baal Tshuva since we are already desensitized? Can I listen to the classics of my youth? Do I listen to it in private and not tell my children? Or is this something I can share with them? The Beatles, for example. Please provide some guidance on this touchy subject. Okay. Very good questions. And there were several more, but this, I think, captures the cross-section of them all. I think that we have to begin by defining what is nigun and what is music. The Chassidish approach to anything is not just doing something dogmatically, it's understanding it. That's Chassidus Chabad. Just like we discussed before secular education, by understanding, dissecting what is going on, what do you put in your mind, and how it affects you. And we'll discuss more of that, as I said earlier. Same thing with nigina and song. What is a nigun? We all know music touches us in ways that words cannot. We all know it touches us very deeply. It can transport you to another time and place. It can make you cry. It can make you laugh. It can push away worries. It distracts. I mean, there's so many aspects. We connect with it. Chassidus Nigunim have a very particular place in Chabad and Chassidus B'chlal. Davening with a nigun we sing at a farbrengen, a nigun when we sing to ourselves, something that can lift us, something that can take us to another place, as I said. Remind us of a farbrengen, can remind us of a pure moment in our lives, a more innocent moment. What is nigina? Briefly, the Alter Rebbe says, in simple English, it's soul transportation. It's transportation for your neshama. On the Maimah Chazal called Bali Shir, Nichnasen B'Shir v'Yetzen B'Shir, which is Din and Shabbos. So the Alter Rebbe teaches that every travel, every journey requires a nigun. It's actually a Ramak. The Ramak actually says it. I believe it's a Ramak that says, Kol aliyah, i-efsher b'li, aliyah menomoch l'gavoya, i-efsher b'li nigun. The Ramak writes this, I believe. I'll give you, since we're talking sources, let me give you the source for that. The Ramak writes this. Shad erech menagin. Kol aliyah menomach legavay eina el yadei nigun. And Kuntas Aspilis, he also brings this. And other places in Chassidus. What does that mean? A body travels with our legs. You want to go faster or farther distances? We have vehicles. We have bicycles and tricycles and unicycles and motorcycles. We have automobiles, we have ships, we have planes, we have rockets and so on. Many different ways to travel. How does the soul move? A soul is not bound by physical matter and space, time and space. So how does the soul move with a nigun? You can have someone who's traveled millions of frequent flyer miles and their soul hasn't moved an inch. You could have someone sitting under a talis, 8 hours under a talis Shabbos without moving, and they're moving millions of miles. A soul moves with a song. When we say we're stirred, your soul is stirred. Music is soul. It's soul music. It's about how the soul moves. So it's really the language of the soul. It's a beautiful sikha. I think it's a Shabbos Shira sikha, maybe in the Nuns, where the Rebbe speaks about Shira as gaguyim, yearning. And he actually explains why in the Haftarah of Shabbos Shira, B'Shalach, we say the Shira, not of the Shiras, the Shira, the main Shira in the Parsha is what? Is Oz Yosher Meisha B'nai Yisrael. The men singing. And Miriam is an addendum, so to speak. And yet the Haftarah is about Shiras Dveda. So there's a whole Likutei Diburim and a story of the Baal Shem Tov and Arichas, because Hakol Hayamina Ofar, a woman is the foundation of everything. But the Rebbe adds in the Sikha, he says, because a woman's connected more to soul, and that's why Kel Be'isha Erva, which is an aside not for right now, not because, God forbid, her singing is a problem. On the contrary, her singing doesn't have layers. It touches right into the soul, and it's a very vulnerable and therefore very intimate experience. So Nigun is about soul language. It's not just reading a book or hearing a speech or hearing words. It's very, very profound and reaches very deep inside of us. If you want a good compendium of Nagina, read Shmuel Zalmanov, Rab Shmuel Zalmanov's introduction to Sefer HaNigunim. Tremendous introduction with a lot of sichos from the Frierdiker Rebbe and other places explaining what Nigun is. In the Sicha Shviur Shel Pesach Tovshin Gimel, I believe it's page 899. He brings there that there are several types of nigunim. A nigun mechuven, he says, that means a nigun that is aligned. It's an appropriate nigun. A nigun v'zoktepes, a nigun that tells something. The Frierdiker Rebbe gives an example: that tshuva nigun, that is bonanis nigun, that avas reim nigun ukadema, a tshuva nigun. It's a nigun that tells something, and then he says there's nigun sheita. V'zog garnisht und is garnisht mechuven, garnisht mechaven. I believe in other places he also brings different layers of song, levels of song. Now the power of song is very clear, especially we see in the youth today. I would even submit that in many ways in the secular world, music has become so captivated young people, in a way it's replaced religion. A rock concert is like a cathedral, like a religious service. Music is called soul, because people are craving for soul language. So nigun, as the Frierdiker Rebbe also says, the Alter Rebbe's word, kulmus ha-lev, sometimes it says kulvus ha-nefesh, is the quill of the soul, the quill of the heart. It reaches deeper and a much more powerful way without any resistance. Why am I elaborating on all of this? Because when you talk about listening to music, you have to understand its impact. The reason music is so compelling is because it cuts right through. Where you need a local train with regular words, with a nigun, it cuts right through all the layers and gets straight into the heart and soul. So the power of a nigun is far more affecting, and therefore both the kedusha of a nigun, the holiness of a song, and the opposite, how it may impact your neshama in a negative way, is also very profound. Now I understand we are human beings on this earth, and many of us listen to different types of songs and music. But at the same time, it's important to know what the standard is. Like I said before with MS, Chassidus is for everybody. But that doesn't mean Chassidus lowers its standards. And it's important to know what is the standard by understanding what is expected of a soul. So speaking here, Chassidus Applied, MyLife, we try to do two things. Talk about what Chassidus expects of us, and then try to each one fit it and tailor it to where you stand. To say that everybody has to be on the highest standard immediately, that's a veda. But you have to know where to go. The Frierdiker Alter Rebbe once said, Chassidus teaches how big you can become, how small you are, and how great you can become. You need both. You need to know. You can't say, I'm going to lower my standard because you know what, I'm a simple person, and what do you want from me? I'm already anyway defiled. That's not an approach of a growing human being. You can say, here's how great you can become, and here's where I stand. That's why it's important to understand the high standard of Chassidus when it comes to all matters. You learn the Beinani and Tanya, we've discussed this. Do you know someone that will never, machshava dibra maisa, thought, speech, and action, never do one thing wrong? Never say something wrong, never have a negative thought consciously? We're not talking about hirir, but deliberately. We're not talking about inadvertently. But still, Tanya makes that the standard, because that's what we're capable of. We need to know that. The same thing here. Nigunim are what I just said. I found a very interesting thing in the Sikha Tovshin Tes. It's printed in Sefer Maimon Tovshin Yud. The first night of Shavuos Tovshin Tes, the Frierdiker Rebbe says, Chassidus nigun hebt uf 3 tfachim. Chassidus nigun lifts you up 3 tfachim, 3 handbreadths. A Rebbe's nigun merer, even more. A Rebbe's song, even more. The nigun hameyuchis, which is talking about the Alter Rebbe's nigun, hebt uf von amke shol bis tachlis seili, from the lowest depths to the highest place. Tachlis seili is as a scholar that heads sich in Aveda. The ultimate is as scholar. Intellect should be felt in Aveda, in internal work. So you see from this what nigunim can do. And we shouldn't trivialize and turn it into a frivolous activity. You know, we all listen to music casually, I understand. And there's music, beautiful music created by composers that are not necessarily Jewish, not necessarily in any way Torah observant, and some are geniuses. Because music is the language of the soul. And just like there's Chochmah B'goyim Tamin, we believe there's wisdom among the nations, meaning wisdom of the world, as I discussed. But it's of the world. And you have to say, nigunim made by such composers they have a way to reach into the soul. And in some ways it's divine as well. But it's going through the garments of someone that was not necessarily divine life. And when they hear their song, it affects you. It may not be, directly their history, but they've put their soul into the song, and therefore in some way it touches your soul. So there's a Yerushalmi that talks about the effect of inappropriate music on Elisha ben Avuya, who was later called Acher. He talk about different effects in that way. And again, I'm not here to tell you have a mashpia, talk to your mashpia applying this. I'm discussing the standard. I don't want to compromise the standard because it may not be practicable for everyone, as some of the questioners asked here. But we have to understand what Nugina is in that context. There's a letter to the Piamenta brothers. It's printed in Likutei Sichos in the Hisafis of Chelik, not positive, maybe 32. It was Tov Shel Lamed Hey, I believe, the letter. Later, the Rebbe actually sent out the letter to me to share with a friend of mine who came to my class. I gave many classes to people in the music industry, and one is Peter Himmelman. And when he asked me some questions, I asked the Rebbe, and the Rebbe told me to read this letter with him. It's a very interesting letter, where the Rebbe is answering the question, can someone who was in rock and roll come back and then became frum in Yiddishkeit, can they come back into this and go back into the world of rock and roll and use it now for Kedusha, for bringing Jews closer to Yiddishkeit and so on. The letter is fascinating. Briefly, the key points I want to address here is that, remember, here again we're talking about someone who's already an expert in this music, not someone who l'chatchila is going there. Someone's already there. That would be like the equivalent of what I said with Dr. Block. Someone's already studying philosophy, is already a graduate. The Rebbe says the following. The Rebbe says 2 key things. He says music today is all about Girui HaYetzer. Talking about rock and roll. It's about instigating the Yetzer Hara. It's about whatever is allowed, do. Whatever you want, do. That's actually. Whatever draws your heart, do. Especially in the areas of sexuality. Hepech, the Rebbe writes. So on one hand, music can be a very destructive thing, a very provocative thing, a very wild thing, inciting a person to go beyond the regular norm in the context of just fulfilling their whatever taiva they have. And this is true, this has been documented. If you ever read Closing of the American Mind by Bloom, he talks about why rock and roll caught on, being a very much of sexual energy and very much this type of no limits. Later we found out that he himself, this author, had his own issues as well. But that's no surprise. On the other hand, the Rebbe says, because it does grab the hearts of the young, so it's pekuach nefesh. It's a tool to reach them. So the Rebbe says something really interesting. He says, if you can go back into that industry, and you're not going on a crusade, but you can make parnasa because you're a legitimate artist, then there's room for you to consider doing it and using it for a kardem lachtach, basically. To use it as a tool for bringing, but if it's you're doing it for holy purposes, that's not the reason. It should be because you can make parnasa and you're also doing it for that reason. A lot can be derived from that. So my answer to the questions that were asked about this whole topic, I would say, to sum up, music is neshama language. Obviously, you want to put into your neshama the purest things possible, especially from the youngest age possible. The fact that we're not perfect human beings and we read sometimes things that are not divrei Torah, and we listen to music, it's not about beating ourselves up. I'm not looking to make anybody guilty. But you ask the question, that's the standard. That's the standard. If you're a person who's in the music industry, as I just read from the Rebbe's letter, maybe a different approach. So it's not a black and white issue here, because it could be used in the proper way, just like Chochmas Umas Elam is metame Chabad Shebameichen. Music, let's say, is metame the lev and even a deeper part of your soul. At the same time, if someone knows how to use it because they were there, maybe there's room for it based on that letter. But l'chatchila, initially, for most of us, you have to use the highest standards, just like you would give your children. You wouldn't give them any type of polluted or toxic food. You don't give them spiritually toxic sounds and so on. The highest level of song is obviously a Rebbe's Nigun. The next level is a Chassidish Nigun. And then there's Nigun Ishtus. That doesn't mean they don't have power. That doesn't mean they're not nice. We're not talking about niceness. We're not talking about winning a Grammy Award. We're talking about what it does to your soul. Let's for a moment touch upon Carlebach music, because that was a question, of course, asked as well. So there's an answer from the Rebbe, actually, interestingly, about this. Both to a mashpia who led a school in France. His name was Rab Shleima. He asked the Rebbe specifically about listening to Carlebach Nigunim, and the Rebbe answered, "Es is doch da genug andere." It's an interesting response. I'm repeating exactly. It means there is, after all, enough other type of music. So the Rebbe didn't say no, definitely didn't say yes, but he said there's enough of other type of music, which is interesting, and I've let everybody interpret it as they see fit. I'm not going to read commentary into that. There's a second story with Rabbi Yitzchak Groner, Olav Shalom, from Melbourne, where Rabbi Carlebach, Shlomo Carlebach, went to Australia, and he was doing concerts, and Rabbi Groner asked the Rebbe whether he should, with Chabad, should host a concert with Carlebach. And the Rebbe's response was no. Okay, so they didn't. It was internal, that was that. A little while later, at some point, the Rebbe asked Rabbi Groner, so what happened with Carlebach when he came to Australia? So he said, the Rebbe said not to host, so we didn't. The Rebbe said, that's officially as Chabad. But why didn't you invite him? He's no different than any Jew to your home for Shabbos, if I bring with him. So you see here an interesting take on all of this. You have to understand, first of all, there's no such thing as a negative attitude. Negativity is not our approach. Even when something's inappropriate, you have to know the context. Absolutely should have invited him. So you could say, why is that not endorsing him? Because you're not doing it in a public form. You're doing it as an individual. You're not doing it in a concert form. Now, I'm not here to talk now about Carlebach, and then recently Zalman Schachter, who passed away last week. That's a whole other discussion. I've gotten questions about that, and hopefully I'll address it, but I want to address it again, not by opinion, but by things that I heard from the Rebbe or heard in the name of the Rebbe with reliable sources. But this is an interesting answer. I would say, without going into details, it all comes down to a composer of songs. That means the Rebbe is saying there's other types of music. Now, of course, the next question will be, what about people that are playing music that are Chassidish? You have Avram Fried, you have my own son-in-law, Benzi Marcus, on the 8th day, a plug for him, and Shmuley Marcus, his brother. There are other very fine Yiddish Shamayim playing Nigunim and so on. So there's no question a Yiddish Shamayim who sings or plays clearly is on a level that part of the Yiddish Shamayim affects their music. They have the responsibility to make sure to convey it. Is it on the level of a Rebbe's Nigun? Well, even a Nigun of the Charatonovs or a Nigun from other composers doesn't come to a Rebbe's Nigun. So there are levels. And at the end of the day, answering the Baal Tshuva question that he asked, are you already desensitized? I found that to be a little interesting. I think maybe people who are not Baal Tshuva are more desensitized because they never make any effort. I would not say because you're desensitized. I'm not going to rule here halachically, or what a mashpia should be telling each of us what you should be doing. I spoke about the standard of it. Practically speaking, you have to really look at yourself. Where do you stand? Where do you want to stand? If you want to grow, you want to be in a little more elevated state, I think what you take in, just like what you eat and how much you eat, what kind of food, the things you read, the things you talk about, and the music you listen to affects who you are. Is there a measure of purity in every nigun? Absolutely. The genius composers, as I said, whether it's rock and roll or the classical music or other types of music, they clearly had a gift. There's not a question about it. They clearly have some type of divine power, but so did Bilam, who's the greatest prophet besides Moshe. So there's power I'm not suggesting they're like Bilam in the sense of evil, but I'm saying the idea that b'chokhmah, that nigunim, that nagina exists in this world, whether we can elevate it or not, that I think we have to go back to that letter, and it's probably more difficult, I would say, than chokhmah sumaselam. The Alter Rebbe doesn't talk about nagina songs in Tanya. He talks about chokhmah sumaselam. It would be interesting if we can find somewhere. I have not found it yet from the Rebbe or from other Rabbeim, comparisons about nagina. Can we say the same thing about song? That if it's used, kardem lachter bei, for Avedis, or someone knows how to use it for Avedis Hashem or Teirosei, whether there would be a heter. Based on the Rebbe's letter, it sounds like yes, but the exact conditions and circumstances is harder to determine. Because music, I would say, is even in some ways even more powerful than secular knowledge, because the way it reaches deeper inside of us. On the other hand, wisdom at the end of the day does affect, as he says, Chabad. It's not just midas. So I guess there's midas, there's moichin, there's nefesh. All this has to be looked into more. I am addressing so far what I found, and I absolutely invite and welcome if anybody has more on this, comments, thoughts, any input that you may have seen. I would love to see it all. I myself will continue doing research, and I'll of course share as things emerge. So, I think enough said for that right now. I'm sure there'll be plenty more to talk about in this regard. Now, let me conclude one more question that was asked, unrelated, about hiskashrus. This was a follow-up to the Rebbe, special Rebbe editions we did around Gimel Tammuz. In Chabad camps, they try to put an emphasis in hiskashrus, or their understanding of it. Hiskashrus means connection to the Rebbe. And some extremists try to cause the children to feel sad that they never saw the Rebbe. As a concept in itself, without explaining what or why, and sometimes the staff themselves lack understanding whatsoever in that field. Besides for that, it causes children to repeat bumper stickers with no understanding at all. Wouldn't the right way be to do so is to arouse love for the Rebbe by straightforward familiarizing the child with the Rebbe, his teachings, videos, stories, and so on, instead of playing with their feelings? Well, briefly, I totally agree with you. Totally is a strong word, so I don't say totally. I agree with you in the sense that I don't know. Everything has to be based on what we've seen. I don't know if there's a hadracha, and I have no source that we should be teaching children who've never seen the Rebbe, now 20 years since Gimel Tammuz, and teaching them that they should be crying for the Rebbe. I think it would be far wiser and healthier to do what it says Chassidus to do. Teach them about Elokus. And let them be like the Rebbe Rashab, who at 4 or 5 years old cried why God doesn't appear to him like he appeared to Avram Avinu. Because if you don't do it that way, you're going to be creating something that's very distorted. Missing the Rebbe, children will grow up and say, what do you mean, what am I missing exactly? We have to teach children Elokus. We have to teach children about godliness, about atzmius, what an atzmi is, what the Rebbe really represents. I don't think it's good to do it in a personality type of fashion, because it's not the way, it's not emes. It's one thing when you see the Rebbe Begashmis, you saw the Rebbe Begashmis, okay. But the Chayev Rebbe is Chayev Ruchnim, even before Gimel Tammuz and Chav Zayin Adar. So the key thing, especially in camp, where the Rebbe is so much lauded, the value of a camp, 24/7 literal influence for 2 months on children, is to infuse them with what real Chassidus and Ruchnius is. Infuse them with Chinuch al Taras HaKedesh, Chassidish Chinuch, of understanding that we were given Ashreinu Matev Cholkeinu. We were given the gift of a mission in this world, as they grow up, to learn that they can make an impact, to use their skills and talents, and to realize that we have a mission given to us by the Rebbe as a messenger of the Eibishter to change the world in some way. And when people understand that we live in a world which is still materialistic, and children understand, and we're aspiring to a world of Geula, putting the Aleph of Alufa Shalelim and Geula to leading to a world of Geula, and then they want to cry why Elokus is not revealed yet, like the Rebbe Rashab cried, by all means. But to lechatchila go intentionally to teach that. I know that in camp there's the alma mater they teach in Color War, where the children sing how much they miss camp, and some kids cry about it, the friends they made, the counselors, and so on. That may be a type of little whatever. I mean, that's forgivable. But I think with the Rebbe we have to be a little more sensitive, And I at the same time, where I disagree with some of this writing is children do need, I don't want to call it bumper stickers, but they need simple ways of explaining things. So when you have a nigun, a song about the Rebbe, some beautiful songs that were composed after Gimel Tammuz, other ways that you convey it in simple terms, that's the way you speak to children. You can't sit down with children at whatever age and start discussing only the deepest concepts of Ayin Beis and Samach Vov and deepest concepts of Chassidus. So you sometimes need to explain it in simpler terms. But I don't think it's about superficially imposing any type of, this is the way to do it and not that way to do it, but rather doing more naturally by teaching people what the significance of the Rebbe is, Chassidus, and so on. So we've run out of time. I hope, as I said, this was enlightening. I look forward to, I'm sure, some comments on many different topics I addressed here. And as again, please send all your questions, any comments to meaningfullife.com/MyLife Live. And if you want to write personally to me, that I can respond to you for any reason to speak personally on the phone or in a meeting, just write to me at Simon, Simon, S-I-M-O-N, at meaningfullife.com. Everyone should have a very Chassidish week, a week saturated with the Rebbe, with our shlichus, whatever that may be, wherever you may be. A week where we are dedicated to the fulfillment of what we were sent here, that each of us should be able to fulfill in the Rebbe's words to a Chassidish Bocher, that the Eibishter soll helfen, as a Teil von den Inyanim, was the Rebbe gewollt durchführen soll, sich durchführen durch dir. Part of the things that the Rebbe wanted to accomplish in this world should be accomplished through you. And hopefully these topics we've addressed help in that direction. So until next week, this has been My Life, Chassidus Applied, episode 25 with Simon Jacobson. Have a very good week.